Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. A little bit of a controversial, talked about subject in many newsrooms, whether reporting is dead, whether reporting is relevant at all. That's the subject of the discussion here. Before we go forward, I first want to establish whether the subject is relevant at all or not, because it's a very polarizing discussion amongst a lot of journalists, a lot of editors, senior editors, young reporters, whether reporting in its classical sense is happening or not. Soutik, you've been reporting for quite a few decades now. I want to understand how has been the journey so far, and have you seen any change which can either reflect or, whether you disagree with the statement that we've been given for the discussion?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks, Sachin, and thanks to all the panelists. I think it's, as Sachin rightly said, it's a very polarizing subject. It's kind of slightly difficult to say or wrong to say that reporting is dead. I've been actually for the last few months reading a lot of archives. I've gone into the archives and reading a lot of Indian reporting in magazines and newspapers in the 1980s and 90s. And then I've been comparing it with what is happening now. What I do find is the rigor of the day-to-day reporting has kind of diminished, possibly because of the kind of conventional beat system getting diminished because of newsroom constraints or budgets or whatever. But at the same time, the good reporting today is far, far better than the good reporting in the 80s and 90s. And when I say that, I mean, and that's pretty obvious because you've got the internet, you've got access to a lot more information on the tap. So the good reporting today is much more rigorous and much more well-rounded. So I think it's a tough thing to say, but on the other hand, the kind of ubiquitous day-to-day reporting that we used to have in newsrooms, I think that's taken a hit, and that reflects a lot in our newspapers looking not so interesting anymore, not reading into it, or the TV channels, seeming very screechy, because I think the day-to-day reporting has taken a hit, and at some point, I think a lot of this blame should be laid at the door of the kind of diminishing standards of beat reporting and access to beats as we knew.
Thank you. Sudipto, one of the challenges of running a website, a news website, just like it is with newspapers or television, is reporting budgets. And the dilemma of the editor and the publisher is, should I be spending so much on a report that is not going to give me as much traction with my audience? Or should I get an opinion maker or an opinion column which allows me to create a little bit of a buzz, especially if it's a controversial topic? And that is something that editors have to deal with every single day. As an editor in a leading website, what is your experience been in terms of budgeting for reporting and then striking the balance between opinion making, opinion writing versus reporting?
So, firstly, though, I mean, the question itself is reporting dead or is the reporter dead? Right? Because, I mean, I can give you an example from today. Ruben and I were discussing about the trouble in Mangalore. Right? One of our reporters falls ill and we don't have a backup. Like, I come from big newspapers, Hindu, HT, and a dozen people could replace one person who is off. And now we have one person covering the whole region for us. And so the reporter itself is a rare commodity. That said, the thing about in a newspaper, a lot of what I did, I was known as an investigative reporter to people who would like fan mail because they would have read only the big Yedurappa expose, they would have read about some mining story. But what gave me an edge at that time was that I had the leeway to run with the ball for some time before I do the big story, which means that there is a function in between, which is just the simple function to inform. Now, with this budget thing, what happens is everything becomes about creating that impact. So I've spent 10,000 rupees on a story, so that story better count, and this many people should read it. Now, it's difficult to produce that story, and the premise itself is a little messed up, because those big stories are not things you go looking for. The moment you start going to look for bigger stories, I think that's where you become somebody who's trying to do something spectacular. And I don't think any journalist should go in with the objective of doing something spectacular. My guru, my mentor is here. I don't know, he should correct me. But the idea is to go find out, look at all the contours of the question, and then come back, and if it's a big explosive story, so be it. But now with this budget thing, the pressure is very heavy on us to create that one story which will create impact, and every story has to create impact. Just the simple thing of when you said budget, no, I thought you meant reporting the budget. The state budget, the union budget, because see, that's a good example of a story where you just want to inform. But no, you'll have to pull out stuff from there which will make eyeballs pop. And budgets, I think, has created that one big problem for us, which is that there's a lot of pressure to create these bells and whistles stories. Yeah.
Ruben, you've been mentoring reporters for many years, and you've been editing magazines. Magazines at one point of time used to spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, money in breaking stories or analyzing stories that mattered to people the most. But magazines, newspapers also have websites where they're running videos. So every story is now not only a print story, but also a photograph or a graphic story or a video or a podcast. Now, given all of this, a certain amount of maybe editorial bias, maybe lack of editorial control on the different mediums may creep in with editors, because they may not have the bandwidth to look at, like you said, one reporter covering, an entire region, whereas earlier there were 5 reporters covering the entire region. Editors are similarly, have a problem of dividing time among so many mediums. So, is that also contributing to the whole debate over the efficacy and the impact of reporting itself?
Yeah, in a way you might be right, because the plate is becoming ever bigger, so the challenges are also multiplying. But I think that's not exactly where the main problem lies. The main problem is, what is the kind of journalism that we are going to pursue? And I think that is where the core issue lies. And we normally don't tend to see the elephant in the room. Yes, money matters, and mainstream media, most of them, but for a few honorable exceptions, they don't have money. Like the organization, the last that I worked for, we just didn't have money. We were broke. But then the bigger challenge, I think, is the kind of journalism that we are practicing. Let me, normally dog does not eat dogs, another dog. But then just 2 days ago, what struck me is there is this very popular Calcutta newspaper. Every now and then, second day, we applaud that newspaper for its searing headlines against the government in Delhi. And we celebrate that paper, we applaud. No, you can guess. Okay. And what struck me was 2 days ago, there was this state minister who was raided, arrested. Another 21 crores was found from a place. I can't imagine that there can be a bigger story than that for a city paper. And you won't believe it, for that paper, it was just a snippet, one para snippet on the front page. And the problem lies there. We all condone that kind of journalism which is being practiced. Instead, we are applauding this paper for targeting relentlessly a political party or someone. That is where the problem lies. We have become opinionated. We are taking political sides. I think that the problem is there.
And in this example, the report itself, the way the report is displayed itself is an editorial point. It's an opinion in that sense, isn't it? Because it clearly shows that the story of the day or the story of the week, if I were the editor of that particular newspaper, was converted into a single column story, whereas the rest of the country was treating it like a banner headline. So that itself becomes an editorial point.
No, because the problem also lies with us, because we do tend to applaud and make that paper larger than life, because it suits our political narrative, right? But then journalism, I'm sure, must be turning in its grave. Journalism is done and dusted. And I think that is the biggest worry. We don't have money, we don't have resources, our plates are becoming bigger, all that is fine. But when we forget the soul of journalism, nothing remains.
But in a sense, Soutik, the essence of journalism that we were taught, or it's still being taught in universities and colleges, is that a journalist has to be curious first. A journalist has to understand whether there's a wrongdoing on part of the government, show a mirror to the authorities, and not just any government, I mean, not just this government or that, I mean, any government, any authority. That part of reporting, has it been, diluted in a sense, and which is why perhaps you see that, reporting itself or beat reporting itself has been affected?
I think to a certain extent it has diluted, and I think three things are responsible, and I think they date back to the 90s. I think the big mistake that the print started making in the 90s was we started following television for our ideas, and I saw that this big change in the newsroom where editors were watching TV news all the time to pick up cues. So that was the first defanging of the print journalist, print reporter in a sense, that you sat in the newsroom, picked up your lead from TV, and then you followed that story. So I think we kind of started losing the script well before social media came into being. In the second iteration, we saw the journalists were all the time sitting in front of the Facebook and Twitter feeds and picking up leads from there. Again, we lose there because we are picking up all our story ideas and feeds from the social media. So first we picked it up from TV, we lagged behind. Then we picked it up from social media, we lagged behind. And the print lags behind, and then what has happened in India is that has basically gone into digital, and what you see in digital is exactly a reflection of these very old malaises, these true malaises where people are not going out into the ground. Of course, there is a shortage of money and there is a shortage of budgets, etc., etc. But I also do believe that we spend an inordinate amount of time since the 90s. We've been spending in front of television sets and in front of social media to get our ideas and cues, and so all these two digital media ecosystem, which I don't think anybody really, the reporters not to blame, and the editors have to find a way around it, is because the digital media is a very strange ecosystem where just writing a good story is not enough, but ensuring that the pipeline of the story has to be really good to reach out to the maximum number of audiences, which means that you need a bit good SEO, you need good traffic management, you need a good social media editor, etc., etc. So you're really spreading the newsroom very thin, And the moment you spread the newsroom so thin, and you need so many people to look after just the traffic bit and this bit and that bit, you are under-investigating in the most important component, which is the reporter itself. We are investing in reporters, and we are also under-investing in training reporters. And all this is now adding up to what the crisis that we see today.
I just want to bring in a little bit of what you mentioned in the first phase of the dilution, which was that journalists looked at television. But television itself is not investing in reporting anymore. From what we know and from what we see, talking heads, opinion making on television has taken precedence over all other kinds of visual presentation of news. So reporting is mostly event-based reporting or live reporting, and rest mostly, unless there is a big story, is mostly opinion generation, either through talking heads or through monologues or soliloquies or whatever the case may be. And this change, has it affected the other mediums as well? I want to ask this question to all three. I mean, so starting with you, Soutik.
You're talking about how Talking Heads has.
Yeah, yes.
Yes, of course, I think it has. And I don't know, but I think in the early days of television journalism in India, there was a lot more field reporting than what it is today. It eventually became a Talking Heads club, and they realized it's a great way to get eyeballs without spending money on reporting. So I think that came a little later. But print kind of floundered trying to understand where it would found, and then now we find, because of ideological partisanship and stories being relegated to the back page and so on, that's another thing. So print kind of entered a very confusing stage, which now we see in digital. And I do believe in India we are not being able to make the transition to print and digital because of these inherited infirmities which we have inherited from the 1990s.
Sudipto? Ruben?
One, yes, it costs less, so everyone is trying to cut costs. And also what we don't generally tend to talk is there is generally a sense of bankruptcy of ideas. We are not reporting, we are not doing good stories to that extent because generally newsrooms have lack of ideas, run out of ideas. So it's a kind of a vicious cycle, one feeds the other. And to a large extent, opinions, because maybe the editors or the owners, whoever wants it that way. So because we'll have to take we'll have to take a side. So opinions come in handy. So because it's serving a larger purpose. So I think that it works that way now.
Just want to add to that, Sudipto, because news journalism in the digital media, like print was affected by, or impacted, not affected, but impacted by television reporting. The live reporting of events also impacts the website. We have to be as much live or perhaps even faster than television in many cases. In such a situation, the impact of television, the impact of breaking news on the larger stories that a reporter may be doing, how does that impact your news cycle and the story bank that you may have created for the week?
Right. So what happens is, see, for us, the x-axis and y-axis has become how do we keep traffic and how do we keep something for members. Right. So as some of you who will come into the digital space will discover that the model now, the buzzword today is membership, subscriptions, behind paywall stuff. So typically, say, our Telangana reporter, Charan Teja, wants to do a story on how Shivaji statues are coming up on the Andhra side of the Andhra-Maharashtra border, and dominant caste communities are using, Telugu-speaking dominant caste communities are using Shivaji as this icon and as a symbol of pride. And it's a deep story which requires many. And I remember for almost a week or 10 days, he just kept delaying because there's something happening in the news cycle. And what are those things? Those are things that you can't ignore. Definitely for us, because it's a consideration in one of our axes, right? To have that traffic coming in. But it's also to stay ahead of the curve, or at least alongside the TV channels. And how are they doing it? Their resources, actually, when you said that it's a lot of talking heads, no, because they are capturing every small little detail in every taluk, every district level, because they have these stringer networks. And video footage now is far more easy to get than it was back when they did it the old way with the big cameras. Right? So TV channels are absorbing these visuals. They have these networks, and we are on tenterhooks, right? Because they consistently push us off our agenda. We are forced to cover that big breaking story. So definitely. And also quickly, just I want to go back to this thing, this initial first question you asked about budgets, right? One other thing that has happened as a result of shrinking budgets is that the reporter, yes, has started searching for this impactful story, but also has become very award driven, because awards are a way to cross subsidize your reporting. Right, so you will do quote-unquote award-winning reporting, right? And award-winning reporting, we also know, is something that is shaped by the awarding authority. We know that this particular entity will give awards for these kind of stories, right? So you start shaping your reportage based on what a funding agency is looking for in terms of stories, and that's the saddest thing. And these jokers from foreign countries, and even in India, right, they'll come and say, we are announcing a fund to do this reporting. I'm like, who the hell are you to decide? We will decide what our agenda is. No, some Azim Premji fellow, some big guy will come and say, we have a little bit of money for this kind of work, and therefore we'll give it to you only if you write up a proposal for this. Right, so I just wanted to take that back to, yeah.
But that is a dilemma that publishers face all the time. If you want to spend on reporting, and Outlook magazine is a great example of that, was known for its breaking news reporting, investigative reporting. Some of the biggest stories of the 1990s were broken by the magazine, and later on, the clash between the publisher and the editor in the crossfire was the reporter. And the reporter then took the fall, and which is why overall the reporting or if not the reporting standards, but the ideas, like you said, were kind of drying up. So does this in the back end or in the back room have an impact on what the reporter is doing on the ground?
Yeah, because you are always constantly trying to save your job, right? Stay under the radar, because the pressures are much more. Your owners want a particular type of journalism to be done. So you are very well aware what your constraints are. And you try to save your job as much as till the very last. So there are these additional pressures that have come into play now. And generally, I think even the editors have become opinionated. Like I know of instances where editors have called in a reporter, briefed him that go out and do this story. And the editor already has set his mind, like this is what he wants when the reporter to report. And when the reporter actually goes around, comes back from the field and says, no, sir, this is, what I have found is this. And the story has been spiked then and there because it just didn't fit into the
narrative of the editor. Yeah.
So that's also happening. And yes, by and large, there is less freedom now to report. And so everyone is conscious. Like the owners are conscious, and even the editors are obviously conscious. So
does political influence also impact the kind of reporting that a news website like yours would do, in the sense that I'm not saying political influence as in politicians will call you, but the kind of politics that is determined in that's going on in the states that you cover will impact the kind of reporting that you do. So, for example, in Tamil Nadu, where caste divisions are quite rife, in Kerala, where there are political divisions between the left and the very rampant right wing now, these kind of politics, what kind of impact does it have on the reporting itself?
See, I think from the south, I mean, my biggest problem, or the reason I keep pushing my reporters, is for them to go hard on the non-BJP or the non-Sanghi, this thing, because I think because obviously when we write about any Sangh Parivar outfit or against the BJP and all of that, the pushback is huge, right? Somebody will convey the message saying that they're not happy, and which is all fine, which is just great, and it's to that extent it's better now that we are in this in the web space, because in newspapers it would actually, when the editor would take a pragmatic call, you would know why that pragmatic call is being taken, because it really affects your bottom lines. We are a little more free that way. But I think the one thing that we fail to do now, and I don't know if it directly answers your question, at least it's my dissatisfaction with our reportage, is we are not able to hold parties such as the DMK, such as the CPM, the TRS, right, Jagan's party. These people we are not able to do a good job of keeping them on a tight leash, no? My greatest worry is that, yes, it is factually true that, yes, they are not the ones who are threatening reporters, let's say. They are not the ones who are, let's even say, dividing society and all of those things. But my fear is that the reporters get lulled into thinking like a voter, which is that lesser of two evils kind of thing. I said, that's not your business, right? If a CPM person has committed an atrocity, focus on that as much as you would on a BJP person. And to find reporters to do that is far more difficult now, particularly in the web space, right? Because a lot of the web space is taken over by reporters who are like myself also. I see myself as an activist-y kind of a reporter, and I don't see anything wrong with that, because among activists, if someone is a communist or whatever, I'm a journalist, right? This is our ism. So to that extent, it's fine, but I feel that somewhere, secular reporters are getting into this thing of soft padding the so-called secular parties, and that's scary, because that, I think, diminishes our stature also.
Does this mean that objectivity is something that is being diluted or sacrificed here? Objectively speaking, we have a party that threatens our livelihood and way of, our very existence, right? I mean, Gauri died. Gauri was a dear friend. So let's not be under any illusion that you can be objective about the fact that Congress and BJP are the same. No. In my opinion, one is a party backed by a bunch of terrorists, okay, and the other is a dysfunctional party, a feudal party, and many other things, right? It has many failings. It's a casteist party, let's say, the Congress, the CPM, the TRS, all these things are casteist, they are, feudal, they are patriarchal, and all of those things, but they don't threaten our life and limb the way this. But so therefore, I say there's no objectivity about this. But then, if we don't push these guys and expose their failings more diligently, I think it enables them to it actually makes them worse parties. It's better that we hold them to account, So I don't know if this is an answer. But Soutik, in the print space and the television space, which they, as you said, they've been jostling with each other for audience attention, and print has been on the losing side on many such occasions. The idea of beat reporting and creating institutional wisdom, because over a period of time, reporters were with a particular newspaper or a particular publication for a long time, and that history of following perhaps a political party or perhaps a particular beat was with the newspaper publication for a long, long time. But now with reporters, jumping ship every 2 or 3 years, mentoring reporters, sometimes editors feel, is a failed cause. Also, when the reporters go away, that wisdom also goes away with them to a certain extent. In such a scenario, what are the challenges that an editor will face or a publication faces, and how do you overcome those challenges to create that that wealth of wisdom for?
I think the problem is,
do people quit the BBC and go away? Sorry? Do people quit the BBC?
No. What I feel is the problem is is a fairly serious structural problem we are facing, and that's why we see so many young people coming to journalism and getting frustrated very quickly. And one of the reasons is that journalism has become a very, very insular profession. We are quite out of touch with what people read and what people do not read, but people want to watch. One is the fact that news is no longer a monopoly of legacy print, television, or even digital as we know it. There are enough independent people doing great work, putting out their work on YouTube, which have huge audiences. Outside India, TikTok is emerging as a source of news. Everybody's on news. Instagram has some terrific stuff, which even legacy organizations like The New Yorker, for example, which is a very serious magazine with 30,000, 40,000 word pieces. You should see their Instagram feed and see how such a legacy organization has adapted itself to something like the Instagram so beautifully and putting out its little stories. So that's one. The print, the digital, and the television newsrooms have become insular in the sense that there's hardly any mentoring happening of young reporters. And when I say this, I was just looking at some data which the Reuters Institute report for 2020 just got out a few months ago. And they found out an abnormally high number of people reading no news at all. Yeah. And when they're asked, why don't you read any news, this is post-COVID, of course, so there is a caveat. So 43% said there was too much of information about COVID. But another 36% said that news has a very negative effect on mood. Now, that's something I hear a lot of the time from people outside. And these are not people who are dislocated from politics or disengaged with politics, or they don't care about politics. So this leaves me wondering, is there a discordance between what we think of how news should be written and the kind of and how we present it to the audience? Is it we who are responsible for people losing interest in news? I'm talking about outside the whole partisan thing and the ideological compulsions and the business compulsions. Beyond that, just to kind of reverse the mirror a bit and say, are we not writing our stories interestingly? Are we not reporting our stories interestingly? Are we still stuck to the basics of what somebody said and somebody added and somebody said in balance and then finished the story? I think there's a lot of that happening. And because, and unless we fix this insularity by actually getting more reporters, having a good newsroom mentoring system, look at the world outside our newsrooms, what other people are doing, and learn lessons from them to bring to our legacy, because you will need legacy institutions. You will need, there'll be news of all kinds. So I'm sure, people will still be going out on beats and will still be breaking stories and will still be writing stories on policy, but there'll also be other kinds of things done within this sphere.
The question of the audience or the viewers or the readers brings me to this last question, because we have only a couple of minutes left, is the whole subscription model that websites are now pushing. News Minute is pushing it, News Laundry is pushing it, The Wire is pushing it, either in form of donations or... So the whole idea is to be independent of the advertiser, which means that the reporter and the editor gets that much more freedom to kind of push the envelope, so to speak. So in that sense, Sudipto and Ruben, I mean, do you see that change happening? Do you think that the audience in India is willing to spend that much amount of money to get quote unquote independent, fiercely driven journalism?
Well, it's a good idea, and people, readers need to pay for the content, but I'm afraid it's not working out at the moment, because yeah, subscriptions, micropayment, pay-per-use, 1 rupee, 2 rupees for every story you read. As a concept, it's very good, but for a organization, the volume has to be that big. So even if you are making 10,000 rupees a month, it's not good enough. You need to make 5 lakh rupees a month. So to get 5 lakh rupees, you'll have to possibly have how many subscribers? So that's not happening. So the volume is still not there. People have got used to free content. And also the content is not good enough to be bought, because we are cutting corners there. The standards have fallen. And as I keep saying, the soul of journalism is gradually dying. So why should people don't think that there is enough reason for them to shell out hard-earned money? So it's not, I don't see it happening in near future. It's a good concept though, but it will take a lot of hard work.
Sudipto, what's been your experience in this?
For me, this membership thing, I mean, in terms of keeping my job and my career alive, it seems like the only thing. But then as a reporter, for me, one of the things that excited me about being a journalist, was that we get to cover a day in the life of the world. That day in the life of the world could involve a tennis match, it could involve an earthquake, it could involve something fairly, ordinary but slightly extraordinary, like it rained today, and rained very heavily, let's say. Right, so that is what is exciting, the fact that no 2 days are similar, and that you can do a variety of things. Now with subscriptions, memberships, my fear is that we are farming one kind of fish, okay, and we are getting a bunch of like-minded people who will subscribe to the worldview of a News Minute, of a Wire, of a Scroll, and we all know that there is a certain editorial slant which is getting more and more pronounced in our outlets, right? And that is a result of the fact that we are trying to pander to that fellow, not inform, not get them to get interested in what we are doing, but we are literally pandering, saying, okay, tum secular ho, Dalit ho, ya fir Musalman, ya fir Christian, ya woman ho. See, because our priorities now editorially are what? Gender, caste, communalism, and so on, okay? Now, my thing is that where is the bipartisan content? Everything doesn't have to be about gender, patriarchy, da. Where is the bipartisan content? And why does membership necessarily require us to fashion content in a certain way so as to get that section of the audience? Saying, who is our audience today? We are saying is an educated, if not an educated, a secular, progressive person, preferably from the South. You know, why should we get, as a reporter, that limits my ability to write on a variety of subjects? Because I know that this story nobody will read. That's a very scary thing for me. You know?
So from the shackles of the advertiser to the shackles of the reader.
Of the reader.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I think we have a couple of minutes for audience questions, if there are any. If not, then we can break. If there is anybody from the audience who wants to ask the panelists any question. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Nirankush. What I wanted to ask is, we talked about how the standards of journalism might be falling, and then a lot of young journalists jumping ship too soon. A parallel problem which I see is that there was a time when news articles and news reports were recognized by the journalist who's written it, and we used to talk about that this journalist wrote this article which brought a certain credibility other than the media house they come from, which is not something we see now. I mean, I personally do not see it enough now. So do you think what the reason is sheer volume of content, or maybe the digital media sources, or what do you think is the reason behind that?
Sorry, who are you addressing the question to?
To the panel.
So he's asking whether the credibility of the journalist and the credibility of the publication that the journalist is working for, so he is more and more into choosing a particular journalist or a particular publication because of the credibility that he attaches to that thing. But given that journalism standards itself, according to him, are falling, then what choice apart from curation do you have to look up to publications? Ruben, you want to take that?
Yeah, credibility has generally taken a hit, and the more polarized the media gets, credibility suffers, it's a casualty. So I think finally the choice is yours, what you want to read. And maybe rather than an annual subscription or a long-term subscription, I'm all for micro payments. Like, you see a good content, good story, you pay 1 rupee, 2 rupee and read it and get out of that, get out of the site or the paper.
Can I just clarify the question? What I meant to ask was, news was identified by the journalist who has written the report maybe earlier, and now it's generally that this is a news from the Quaint, the Wire, and we do not see a lot of names. A lot of articles are not even bylined. So the name of the journalist missing has, for me, reduce some kind of credibility, because I could know the person.
That I really welcome and celebrate, okay? Because there was a time when the only bylines you would see in legacy publications would be a Mishra, Sharma, Iyer, Iyengar, some form of Brahmin from some part of the country. Right. Now, with the coming of new media, that hegemony of the Brahmin, the predominance of the Brahmin in journalism has definitely eroded. Now that, if it is seen as a drop in credibility, I would then question the credibility of those people who did hold those positions for 40 years on end, right? Because these reporters who you talk about, I know, right? Like in publications like the Hindu, Times, these legacy publications, 40, 45 years, they've not retired, only they're still covering that same thing. I don't know how credible those journalists or those outlets itself were, because if you look at it in terms of, I don't know if I completely agree with Ruben here when he says that journalism standards have fallen. I think some kinds of journalism that have happened, I mean, some stories that have happened in the last, say, since 2014, 15 onwards, Indian journalism hasn't seen those kind of stories.
No.
We used to have a bunch, sorry, we used to have people used to go for holy parties of Vajpayee.
No.
Right, so
I would like to
that has
clarify.
changed.
I'm saying that there is fantastic journalism happening. There are great reporters who are working. When I say that journalist standards have fallen, it's generally the legacy media standards have fallen, because they have kind of compromised. But individual journalists
I think is sterling today compared with the...
But the institutions are failing them.
Yeah. And I can't point to many journalists of the previous era, okay, and pick them out as people who would have taken the chances that some of the younger journalists today are taking, right? You just, earlier there was, what Ara? She was on the channel, on the panel about women who face Isma Tara. right? But I don't know of many people from that previous generation who did that kind of work, right? They didn't put themselves against the government that much. So therefore, I do believe that today my colleagues are far more credible than some of the people who've been my bosses, right?
I completely agree. I think the best journalism today is being done outside legacy, and it's being done by some really fearless, feisty young women. Absolutely, there is absolutely no doubt about it. They're absolutely heads and shoulders above any journalism being done by any news channel or a magazine or a digital site. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
And earlier, the bar to become a journalist was so high, right? It was not enough for you to get a journalism degree. You needed to know somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody for you to get that job. Today, that's not happening. You have far many more women, far many more people from smaller towns, Dalits like myself. I mean, I'm an executive editor of a fairly large publication. This has never happened in the history of Indian journalism. Right, and these are things which I think also need to be celebrated while we are calling doomsday and all of that.
Yeah, that will be the last question before we break. Yes.
Good evening, panelists. So when Sudipto very rightly pointed out that none of the parties are good. Like BJP is definitely an organization of terrorists, and TMC is also TMC or Indian National Congress. All these are casteist, sexist, and everything. But you need a media that has both the opinions, because when you talked about the subscription model, you said that if I am catering to my readers, then they're also my audience giving me the money, so I have to put out one narrative. So sir, my question to you on those lines is, what will be a very sustainable model of funding so that you can sustain these opinions and cater to both the narratives and just bring out the truth without pertaining to a bias, but also calling the things out, calling sexism, sexism, calling casteism at its face?
Heart of hearts, I'm just still a print person. I just want print to do better, right? That is a sustainable model. It's a model that is failing also because I can be pretty sure that all you students over here, very few of you must be even picking up a newspaper, right? Newspapers are a great way because I think there is something to be said about something that lands on your doorstep and sets the agenda, as opposed to something which you click on, the guy comes on TV, he starts screaming, and then this is a very powerful tool, newspapers. And the fact that they have lost credibility, the fact that they are cutting corners is the sad part. Because just in terms of impact, when you say broadsheet, it really have that breadth, that wingspan to accommodate what I was talking about earlier, which is the function to inform. Right, the thing that gives me stress and anxiety now is that every one of our stories has to be viral, has to go big. Right, if that pressure was not there, I would feel satisfied if I went to the court, just that is proceedings, I came back and reported it dutifully, because I know that 10, 15, 20 years, 50 years from now, somebody sitting in the archive section will pull that out and say, okay, is case mein, is din mein kya hua? And that record-taking function is such an important part of journaling, which is why journalism. And so therefore my hope, or rather not hope, now it's a lost hope, but print is really the, yeah. So, later.
No, I know there are subscriptions and subscriptions. A subscription for a small digital outfit, which is ideologically inclined, and there's nothing wrong in that, is more of a subscription to a club rather than a publication. If you look at the New York Times, for example, it's an excellent example of, 80-90% of its 8 million readers are now subscribing to them digitally. Now that's a subscription model on a different level. This is a subscription model which sustains a gigantic newspaper with about more than 2,500 journalists. Now, why has this happened? Because New York Times, for whatever biases it might have, has invested heavily in reporting. It's a reporters-led paper, and it's a newspaper in the true sense. It's a publication with a wide swathe of interests, from the arts to cinema to food to politics to investigations to VR to everything. Now, if you want a subscription model which is viable, you have to invest in journalists, you have to invest in reporters at that level. Otherwise, you're going to be happy with a club subscription or something. As for example, in TV, you go through cable or those models, and those models will last as long as people stick with them. Eventually you have to move to some kind of subscription, I guess.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now I would like to call upon the stage Mr. Jameel Khan to hand over the gifts to our guests.